All right. Three, two, one. Mr. Charles Blain. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited for the conversation.
Well, Charles, like I had mentioned, I'm actually honored that you're here. You are the definition of success in the sense of you're a young man, you're a writer, policy analyst, you're a TV personality. I mean, you've accomplished so much at such a young age. And like I mentioned prior to the recording, I'm actually a huge fan of yours. I've seen you on Fox 26 Houston's What's Your Point? You know, your insights are always on point, factual. It's not based on fake news, if you want to call it that, but rather research data. And so it's an honor to have you as a guest. But before we start talking about politics and all that fun stuff, I'd like to kind of go back to your origins. What is Charles Blaine's origins?
Well, it starts in New Jersey. I was born and raised in New Jersey, just outside of New York, a small town called Lodi. Like I said, born and raised there. I moved to Texas in 2014. But before moving to Texas, I didn't really have too much involvement, or at least professional involvement in politics. I followed it loosely. I started to get a little more interested in it towards the kind of last few years in New Jersey. But my parents, they were like hardcore New Jersey Education Union Democrats. They were very active in the union politics and procedures and all of that. And same thing with my grandmother, very active in the Democratic Party. So I kind of went the opposite direction, but I had a distant view of politics, but wasn't really engaged until I moved to Texas.
You know, that's interesting you say that. I've moved around a little bit. So from LA, moved to Dallas, Texas, where I fell in love with Texas. Then I moved to New Jersey, Bayonne, New Jersey. Yeah. I was there for a few years. People probably don't know Bayonne. It's a tiny little pocket, old school Polish, Irish town, but it's got charm. It's not too far away from Jersey City and Hoboken, right? Connects you to the city. So it's kind of funny that you're talking about Jersey because Jersey and New York are heavily union, right? Union-based states. Can you tell us a little bit more about the impact that your parents, your family had on you with kind of ingraining on you, hey, you have to be active for change?
Yeah, well, it was interesting because it wasn't so much something that they spoke into existence as much as they kind of led just through their own actions, and just kind of seeing how engaged they were with the union efforts through the New Jersey Education Association, and not so much direct political efforts, but just kind of the union efforts was really interesting because for me, growing up and watching them do it, I was just kind of watching the process of it, not so much diving into the policy or the politics behind it. And it wasn't until I got older that I really started looking into public unions and kind of their connection to a lot of the things that we see in our major cities, whether that's unfunded debt and liabilities and all these other things, that I really took like an opposing stance to it. But it's still what kind of guided me along the way in terms of my initial introduction into politics and policy. And it was interesting. I mean, like you said, New Jersey and New York, both heavily unionized states. And so kind of the deference that's paid to unions and the ability that they have to organize and to implement the things that they want is so much different than what you find in Texas. And so it's kind of like night and day watching it. But what's interesting and what I've kind of discovered over the years of working in urban politics in Texas is while there is often a conversation about the limited impact unions can have, they still do play an outsized role in terms of what they can accomplish in a right to work state. And so it's been a real interesting dynamic for me. And that's always been one of my my deep policy interests, partially because of just by nature of growing up, my parents' involvement in it, but also being involved in local politics in big cities. It's such a big part of the conversation that can't be ignored. And so it just ended up being something that followed me along the way the entire time.
So, and again, one of the things I like about you is your facts. And you just mentioned something about funding certain policies. So let's talk about public pensions. My background is actually a pension professional. I know a little bit about public pensions and private pensions. So going back to your origins, would you say that one of the fundamental reasons or ideas why you went from perhaps, and maybe we shouldn't say Democratic Republican, maybe from less liberal to maybe a little bit more conservative, would be because of those programs, those idea of thinking?
I would say that certainly it contributed to it, but more so after I got involved and then started really trying to develop a solid kind of basis of policy. I think initially for me, it went from a complete just kind of disengagement, non-involvement. I was not paying attention to politics. I saw it from afar based on the work that my parents and family were doing, but I just had no real interest in it. And so when I was in New Jersey, it was the 2008 election was the first election I was going to go vote in. And I remember in New Jersey, being closed primaries, you have to kind of declare, which party you're going to associate with. And up until that point, I had not spoken about politics really. I just kind of like casually observed, like I said, what my parents were doing. So when I went to go vote with my dad, and I had to publicly declare that I was going to vote Republican, it kind of came as a shock to him. And so that started kind of a long series of numerous conversations that happened over the years, very contentious conversations with my family. That's kind of that's what initiated it. And then when I did get involved in politics and started to look more at some of the issues. When I moved to Texas in 2014, it was on the tail end. Well, it was the tail end of kind of the fiscal challenges that the city was facing, the city of Houston was facing from an unfunded pension liability. But then it was at the beginning of the approach to fix it. So you're kind of in the middle, new mayor coming in, getting ready to fix it. And so I moved from New Jersey to Texas at that time, and then jumped into local politics and started seeing that conversation. And then that started to help build my perspective on it. And so that was really when I started, was my first foray into local politics. I started writing and everything. And it was about that pension crisis that Houston was dealing with. And so that's where I got the most informed from it. I think I got the kind of the inside view, the beneficiary view, like kind of what the union members were seeing of that issue from my parents. And then when I got involved in politics, suddenly it was kind of like a baptism by fire approach from the policy side of things. And so it was an interesting dynamic. And I think that it helped me shape my perspective. And I try to talk about it in a different way, because I understand that while we're talking about kind of like numbers on a piece of paper, at the end of the day, those numbers on a piece of paper are someone's livelihood. And so you got to kind of balance the two. And I think too often people speak only about it from one side, and you really got to balance the two, because yes, they're numbers on a piece of paper. And at the end of the day, a city needs to be fiscally solvent. But again, that's someone's livelihood that they worked their whole life for. And you're talking about either reducing it or getting rid of it or something. And that matters to folks.
Absolutely. And, I just love hearing you speak, because besides being conservative, you and I are both men of color. So what was your experience transitioning, not just from liberal to conservatism, but now here's a man of color moving to Texas, being involved in Texas policy, where maybe your colleagues don't look like you, don't resonate with your upbringing of New Jersey, unions. How was that for you?
It's been an interesting learning experience, I think, for me, for a number of areas, because when I first started, and when I was moving to Texas, a lot of the people in New Jersey were like, well, there's this kind of narrative that conservatives or Republicans are racist. And so it's going to be even worse in Texas. You need to be prepared for that. But what I found was that when moving to Texas and getting involved in Republican politics, a lot of the prejudice or just even kind of ignorant comments that I would come across were typically from and I'm not just talking about Democrats, but very progressive liberals who didn't like that a Black person was involved in conservative politics. It was, how dare you think that way? Like, it threw me off for a bit. But then what I noticed from the conservative side of things is that there was conversation, and kind of similar to the pension conversation, where you're talking a lot about an issue and you're talking about it in such an abstract form that you don't actually consider, or through the conversation, it doesn't seem as though you're considering the people who it's impacting. So it happens a lot when we're talking about urban policy and it's a conservative perspective, because, if you're looking at, on the whole, most conservatives aren't really living in urban centers. And so when they talk about the issue, it's from a little more of an abstract perspective. And I think I brought a different perspective to that, because I was born and raised in urban areas. I still live in an urban area. You're going to have to drag my dead body out of the city, because I'm not leaving the city willingly anytime soon. But I think they're too important of an area to abandon. And I think that conservatives have for a long time kind of abandoned them in terms of policy. And so when we talk about it, it's, again, from a very abstract perspective. We're talking about things like, for instance, there was a massive change to the food stamp program in Texas and what people are able to purchase with it. And this was just last legislative session. And I was talking to a number of legislators about, I understand the purpose of this. The idea is to try to encourage people to buy healthier food. So they wanted to limit the types of food or the level of sugar that's in the type of food that they're purchasing. But at the same time, you also have to understand that there are real people out there who cannot get to a store that's separate from what's on their corner. And if that store does not sell the food that food stamp now allows, then what's what's going to happen? They're probably going to sell their food stamps to someone else and then use the cash for something. So like if there's these kind of very nuanced, intricate conversations that I think are missed a lot of times by some conservatives who don't have that connection. And so for me, it took a while to recognize that that was missing in the conversation when I was kind of getting my bearings in Texas politics. And then took me a little longer to get comfortable with kind of putting that out there, because it's often overlooked, but it's also ignored in many instances, or people just don't seem to care. But I think it's a vital part of the conversation. And so it took me getting more comfortable talking about the experiences and the people that I knew and implementing that into the policy conversation to help color like a better picture or a more well-rounded view of it. And since then, it's been good. And I mean, it's not to say I don't get pushback. It's not to say that people don't still disregard a lot of those experiences or just are unaware of them. But I think we're entering a new place where people are a little more open to hearing those different perspectives and to trying to integrate them into broader policy that they're pushing.
So you mentioned a few things. The last statement, right, regarding the just the idea as being a little bit more accepting. I think as newer generations are coming to the scene, and the older generation are retiring, passing away, the newer generation are more open-minded, right, with the ideas that that are being shared. You mentioned a great point. Like you and I, we're not from Texas, but we've lived in cities where there's excellent transportation. New York City, best public transportation, right? But then moving to Dallas, living there for a little bit, living in the Woodlands, which I know you all call it the Wonderlands, the Sugarland, for me, it's one of the funniest things I ever heard. I just bust out laughing when you guys Pearland, Sugarland, the Woodlands. Public transportation is almost non-existent, honestly. The Woodlands, different, right? That's like the rich area, right? There is like a trolley, right? But outside of that, there's nothing. And to your point, the food stamp example, if you're living in, because Houston is huge and there's lots of undeveloped cities, right? Missouri City, and you have all these, right? Where to your point, the only thing that they have is a Quick Trip or a Buc-ee's across the street. That's it. And their options for food is, like bag of chips. Like it's not a true grocery store. So I'm just curious. So when you brought that to their attention, because that is a valid point, what was their take on that?
Most people that I bring it up to are generally accepting of it. I can understand why, if you don't know folks who live that experience, or if you've never lived that experience yourself, it's just something that doesn't register. And so most people that I've brought it up to can understand that. I think there have been, even with school choice, for instance, and this was a few years back, I was speaking to someone about it, and they were talking about individual or kids getting to the schools of their choice. So parents get them plugged into the program, they get accepted. And this was well before school choice had passed, but we were just kind of talking about it. And I brought up, well, what about those parents who, kind of work from 6 a.m. until 5 p.m. and can't get their kid across town to that school, or, there's no bus service that provides it directly to them. And they're like, well, they'll just figure it out. And it's like, well, no, that's not like a solution. Like, it's not a solution for anybody to just figure it out. Like, yes, parents will force to, but why are we creating a program that's then going to force them to figure it out if you have the ability to alleviate that burden for them so that they can take advantage and give their kids the best opportunity as well? And so in that instance, and again, years ago, it was received well, but I think there are these things, it's just they're innocent oversights, but because you can't really blame someone for not knowing what they don't know. But I have run into instances where you do bring these things up and they are kind of wholesale dismissed, where it's like, well, that's just a few people, or the number is negligible that it's going to impact. It's like, well, you're passing policy, statewide policy, to impact folks. You should try to mitigate that as much as you can before, because it's going to become an issue that you're going to have to deal with, whether it's next legislative session or whenever it is. It's going to remain an issue. And so generally speaking, I will say it has been received well, thankfully.
Love it, man. So obviously you've done the work, right? You've had the conversations that may not be as easy to have, faced opposition from individuals that are older and, quote, more experienced, right? So with all that experience, all that life experience that you've developed, is that what motivated you to start, your think tanks, to be more active with, your policy writing, your recommendations? Kind of curious, what was the process there of creating your think tank company?
Yeah. So for me, it was, so when I moved here, it was to work for a campaign. Then I worked for that campaign for, I guess it was 8 months, kind of close towards election day, then shifted to the nonprofit public policy space. And then I did that for an organization for about 5 years. And I started to realize after sitting in city council every day, or twice a week, I would realize that you had these small groups of people, but very vocal groups of people who would show up regularly. And it was kind of the retirees who had the ability to show up. You had the paid lobbyists or other consultants who were paid to be there. And then a couple of other people who had an issue in their community who then had to take off all day of work and go and be there. And typically those people or business owners had their voice kind of least represented because they could not be there. You sometimes had to sit there for hours to even get your 2 to 3 minutes to speak. And so one day I was watching the Houston Archaeological and Historical Commission, which is like, if you want to go down to like the 35th level of government, like that's where you just got to keep digging and you get there. So watching a meeting for that group, and there was a man who testified that he had purchased a commercial building in it was in a historical zone. And so it had graffiti on it. It had not been utilized in years, maybe a decade. And he bought it, wanted to restore it. He started painting the sides, he painted the back, and then he got ready to paint the front facade. And when he got ready to do that, the code enforcement came by and said, you don't have a code, you don't have a permit for this. We're going to red tag you. You have to go down to the historical commission and fight for your ability to do what you want with your building. So he goes down there and he explains himself, which is really just to say that this building had graffiti all over it and I'm painting it, which it in and of itself is better than what it was. But like, okay, they were like, well, we have the ability under the whatever subset of the code it was to tell you what color you have to paint your building. And you didn't get this color approved before. And I was just, my mind was blown. And so there was this man sitting up in the front row as this was going on, and they called him up there. And it turns out that this was the individual who had called city code enforcement and reported him. And they then proceed to ask him what color he thinks that he should paint the building. And I was like, this is the craziest thing in the world. And then like the last part of it was they went to go sit down, and the individual who had initially reported him told the commission, like, well, you can tell him what color to paint the grout too. Like, you have the ability under this. So they were like really getting into these like intricate details of this man's business, who was just simply trying to restore this building in this community. That just ate me up. And from that point forward, I felt that there was really a need to balance out the conversation that was happening at these commissions and just at City Hall in general. Because again, you had those limited groups who were there. You didn't typically have anyone pushing a free market perspective or limited government perspective or personal responsibility perspective at the city level. And so that's what pushed me to launch urban reform.
First off, that's insane. What year was this?
This was in 2018, I would say, 2018, 2019.
So this is a 2018 case. Wow. And it kind of contradicts, right? The narrative or the headline of Texas, you buy your property, it's yours, you do whatever. Yeah. Like, it totally contradicts that. You know what I mean? Absolutely. So it sounds like it's from another state. Let's just put it that way. You know what I mean? So just curious, what was the result of that case?
Yeah. So unfortunately for him, I wouldn't say unfortunately, as what most people do is he just acquiesced and said, fine, I'll do what you have to do, or what you're asking me to do. And he did it, and he kind of got to move on. And then, but from that, that like ate me up. And for probably the next year, as I kind of sat there and rumbled on it, that's what forced me to launch an organization focused on that, because I wanted to really focus on the local level, and there was no conservative organization out there doing so. And so I started to look for a job. I was like, these are the issues I want to focus on. Let me see if there's an organization out there doing it. I'll go work somewhere else. And I could not find an organization out there that was working in an urban setting on the local level. And so the only opportunity I had was to do it myself.
So, and again, just from my perspective and opinion, you're very successful. Again, with just being such a young man. And the reason why you're successful, I just see it. Your passion, period. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
Someone can say no. You're like, I don't care. I'm going to keep going. It's a numbers game. You know what I mean? And you can see it, right? The fact that you're, let's be honest, people that are outside of your niche, your profession, they wouldn't. Same with me. Like, I look at actuary tables, like they're gonna go to sleep. You know what I mean? But we find our career, our specialty, like, oh, this is exciting. This is like a football game, right? A baseball game, whatever. And so for you, being able to align your next career, your next position with your morals, or with your, with your beliefs, is, I think, the definition or the formula of success, right? Your passion, and align it with what you want to do 8-10 hours a day. And I think a lot of, a lot of younger professionals, that's something that tends to be missed just because a lot, now you have like, young folks getting rich on TikTok for doing a dance or doing a twerk or, you know what I mean? Whatever, right? I mean, short term, but long term, I think that right there is the formula of success, is aligning your passion with your work.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So how has being in the media shaped your ability to influence policy conversations?
Yeah, that's a great question. At first, I didn't realize that it did. I kind of, because I don't know, when I started in politics, I didn't know anybody who had worked in politics. Like I said, my parents did the union thing. My grandmother did kind of the volunteerism, but like I didn't know anybody who was a professional in politics. And then next, when I got into media, like I had never met anybody who did media before. It just was outside of the realm of anything that I could comprehend. So it wasn't as though I mean, I guess there were templates out there, but there wasn't anybody I could ask. So I just kind of figured it out as I went along. Made a lot of mistakes in the course of that. But I also didn't realize kind of the weight it carried at times. Because to me, I was just talking about things that I liked or didn't like. And it didn't really matter as much until I started going outside, really, after being on TV and then seeing people respond to me in a different way, or seeing people bring up something that I said 3 weeks ago that I don't even remember I said 3 weeks ago. And so that's when it started to make me realize that, like, okay, this is a little more weighty than I had previously thought. I should probably take, not that I wasn't taking it seriously, but that I need to understand that everything I say, whether it's an issue I deeply care about or not, carries some level of weight, and I should probably put an extra effort into developing a thorough policy thought or something behind it. And so even if it's something I don't care about enough, like at least making sure that whatever I say aligns with my values, so that it always holds up to something I can agree with. And so I would say that as I've taken that approach, I've realized that it carries a lot of weight. The ability to amplify conversations that might otherwise go ignored, or the ability to sway conversations that are in the public domain, just because of the fact that you can kind of do so on the radio or on TV or through some print medium. It's hugely impactful. And it's not even that I cannot say that in any one instance, something that I said has flipped the switch on an issue, but being able to help either better inform on an issue, help sway the conversation in a different direction, or provide an alternative. Those are the things that you notice.
I appreciate your honesty and your transparency, because I think what you said is just raw, truthful, because not anyone can get on TV. Like there's a process, right? To just even be a volunteer on the Forbes magazine writer, like there's criteria, let alone be on TV weekly on Sundays, right? Sundays, 8 a.m. Central Standard Time.
Thank you.
Don't miss it. You have to be top of A grade. You got to be the best of the best that's in that list, right? So once you do get the call, absolutely, you have a microphone. There's power behind that, behind those words, and there is a weight tied to that, right? And without saying names, right, we've seen recently, a couple months ago, the consequences of being a public figure, and so that's just a reminder that people hold opinions to heart, right? They hold words that maybe you just said it just because we're all humans, right? But someone in some state somewhere holds that deeply, you know what I mean? And so definitely can appreciate you understanding and living with that principle, that it comes with great responsibility, right? And being just aware of how far reach your audience will be.
Yeah. And it actually, one of the reasons I kind of woke up to it was, one day, I typically do not engage in kind of like the attack on someone's like personality or their person. It's really, I try to stick to ideas. But one day, I can't even remember who the official was, but I took kind of like a personal jab, and it was really out of character for me. And the funny part is, as I was doing it, I felt it. Like I felt that this was like not who I am. And so I kind of brushed by it. And then later that day, I got a message on Facebook from a woman who, much older, Democrat. And she messaged me. She's like, I watch what you're point all the time. And she's like, I never really agree with you. She's like, but I always respect the way that you make arguments. And she's like, and today when you took that attack, that was not you. And that really was really disappointing to see. And even though she was, never going to agree with me, never going to find alignment on things, the fact that she said that, it's probably because I thought of it myself too earlier in the day. And then she said it, it kind of reaffirmed it. And I was like, you know what, she's right. And so from that point, I really tried to make sure, and it's not to say that I'm perfect and I don't do it from time to time, but especially when you're you're getting close to an election season and things are heated. But I do try to make a point to really stick to the issues or really stick to someone's idea and attack that rather than the person, because I think you lose a lot in the conversation when you go after someone's person or family members or just different things that don't really matter as a part of the conversation. And so it came from a very unlikely source, but it was a necessary wake up call. And I'm happy that it happened early on rather than further in.
So, and again, I think that's, again, that when we were talking before the recording and all, that's what really attracted me about just the way you are, facts, right? And let's be honest, we're, again, being a man of color, especially in policy, you got to work 3 times as hard. You got to be 3 times smarter than the other person you're talking to. And you have to be so clean that any jabs, they'll be like, oh, see, this is why we can have so-and-so on the show. You get what I mean? And that's just the truth, right? And so with you, just facts, right? And then swaying away from the cheap shots, right? Even though it's not fair that someone outside of the group can do that. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I agree. I mean, I think that there's a requirement to kind of rise above it. And I've seen in many different instances, whether it's on our show, other shows, or just not on TV as a whole, people take those opportunities to take the cheap shots. And unfortunately, for some, they get away with it. And for others, they don't. I think for folks like me, it's just never been, one, it hasn't been in character. So that's why I felt it out of character when I did it. But 2, it's not something that I can necessarily get away with. I think I will kind of be called out for it. I wouldn't get nearly the number of opportunities I did if that was what I resorted to. And so, no, I wholeheartedly agree. And that's why I try really every single time to be on, whether it's to know the facts of what I'm discussing, or if I don't know the facts or don't have a solid opinion rooted in fact, try not to talk too much about an issue. Like, I'll still give my opinion, but I keep it like 30,000 foot view rather than trying to get too intricate. And I really like to stick to things that I can be backed up with, because if you can challenge my fact, and I'm happy to be proven wrong. Like, if the fact that I use is wrong, okay, I'll own that, but that's still better than me taking a cheap shot on someone and then having to back that up. I can admit when I'm wrong on a fact or something like that, but if it's something else that's outside of my character that I'm doing or that I've done, that's what it's hard to come back from.
And again, I appreciate you just being so transparent, because a lot of people, because the thing is, you don't have these kind of conversations. And so a lot of people that are professionals, they think about it, but they don't say it. You know what I mean? So I appreciate you just being open. And, everything you talked about, right? About debates and all that, I'm sure it gets amplified when there's cameras in front of you. It's live. What's been your experience in those situations where you got 10 other people, they have all these accolades, all these credentials, and like, it's a hot topic. Like, what's been your experience in those moments? Like, what are you thinking? What's your, what are you feeling in those moments when you're recording, when you're on the show? Like,
so
walk us through.
At the start of it, I would get so nervous. Like, you would get just kind of just me. I don't know. I can't speak for everyone. I would get just overwhelmed with nerves that I would then attempt to, it was a good thing though, because it encouraged me to make sure that everything I said was like on point, crisp, but it was a little too rehearsed. Then as I've gotten more comfortable, for me, it's almost just like having a one-on-one conversation. But what I've also noticed is just that everybody has a different approach to it. So on our show, when we're in the commercial break, we're kind of laughing, we're talking. And then once we get back to it, everybody's serious. But I've done shows, like for instance, I did a couple of years ago, it's around Christmas, doing a Jake Tapper show. And was with this very high profile political consultant, and then there were 2 reporters, and it was in Washington, D.C. So it's like very different than our kind of Sunday show. And no one was speaking during the break. Everybody's kind of like looking down, and then the cameras went on, and the person next to me just went in for the attack. And it was just wildly different than I've ever seen. And she just kind of started going after me, and I was able to kind of keep up with it, but it was just such a different perspective. And so for me, as I've done this, I've really started to, whether it's intentional or not, I don't know, but pull myself out of it and kind of just let what I know speak through. And so it's, at a lot of times, if I'm going back and forth, it's almost as though it's not even kind of like, I don't want to say it's not me there, but it's, I'm familiar with the information that I'm using. I'm comfortable with what I'm saying and the facts that I'm sticking with. And kind of, I just like let the conversation flow. It's almost as though if you're in a conversation with a friend and you're not really fully cognizant of the moment, you're just kind of going back and forth, rapping back and forth. It's kind of like that. And so it's gotten very easy in that regard. But occasionally there's a time when there's someone on the panel or I'm on a different show that's outside of our setting where you really got to be on full guard. And it's unusual. It's very strange. And so, but luckily I've gotten very comfortable with it, particularly because I try to talk about issues that I deeply care about or I really know well. And that has allowed a certain level of comfortability behind the camera where I don't have to put on something that I'm not. I just want people to see who I am because I hope that when they see me in the street, which they often do, they see the same person that they see on TV.
I love it. It's all about
Yeah.
authenticity and being authentic. I can appreciate that. And again, I think, especially now with and by the way, totally relate to you about being on script when you have like a board meeting, when you're presenting to the chief, whatever.
Right.
I get it. But then as you get the experience, you're like, I don't have to prove myself. I've already proved myself because I'm in the room. So now I'm going to be authentic, obviously professional, but I'm going to be authentically me with the facts, right? And I can go off a little bit and I can riff because I know my area of expertise. You know what I mean?
And you know the limits, the parameters in which you can kind of operate. Once you're comfortable with that, I think there's like a certain level of creativity that can be found when you know the kind of jurisdiction that you're in, the box that you're in, what you can say, how far you can push it, then you can kind of be creative within that and do whatever. And I think there are a lot of unique ways of doing it. And, that's when I think some people take the cheap shots because they think that's a good way to go to. But I think there are more thoughtful and creative ways that people would like to see you address an issue or address a person. And I try to kind of find those avenues when I can.
And, and that's one of the reasons why I also enjoy listening to Marcus Davis as well. I feel like you two are just complement each other because he's a little bit more, he's experienced. He's an entrepreneur. I just love his rawness, like, you know what I mean? But he owns it, you know what I mean? And so I can respect his passion when it's talking about, regulations that's tied in with small business owners because he's a business owner, and then just not being scared to represent the people of color, group that are business owners and being outspoken about conservative policy, right? Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what, your ethnicity is. If you're a business owner, you're going to have the same issues, as John Smith and whoever. And so I like that he's able to really just be like, look, this isn't an ethnic, this isn't a person of color thing. This is a business owner thing. You know what I mean? So I love how he's able to split those things apart.
No, I think Marcus offers such a good, unique perspective. I mean, I've learned so much from him, from being on the show with him, and just for the conversations we've had outside of the show. But I think one of the things has been his authenticity and how he brings that fully every single chance he gets, and he kind of leans into it and lets the passion show on issues that he deeply cares about, because he is talking about his business and his livelihood and what that means, what the next mayor and the next mayor's administration can mean for his livelihood. And I think people want to feel that. And too often on TV, people try to kind of put a filter before that because you have to be polished and this and that. But I don't think so. I think people want to know that you feel what they feel. They want to know that you have skin in the game as well. And I think he does a really good job of kind of letting that show and without hiding it. Absolutely.
You mentioned Mayor John Whitmire. So I was still living in the Wonderlands, right? At that point when he was running and got elected. I know he had positive polls when he was first elected. Me not living in Texas, I haven't been so much in touch with Houston politics, but what's your opinion? How has he performed up to this point as mayor? What things do you like? What things do you think, he can probably refocus on, readjust?
Yeah, I mean, I think given where the city has been, I've been very pleased with where we are up until this point. I recently had some I don't know, call them frustrations, but things that I've kind of pointed out. There's been some questions about what the appointed chair of the Houston Metro is doing with contracting and different things like that. There was actually a piece out today from a friend, Wayne Dolcefino, about this kind of homeless shelter that just popped up out of nowhere and the financing surrounding that and some questions there. And so those things, I ask questions, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll get some good resolution to it. Cautiously optimistic though, because at the end of the day, we're still working with government. I don't necessarily, there are a bunch of different levers in government that can always be pulled, and you might not get the resolution that you want. And so while I'm cautiously optimistic because of much of what he's said and done in the first half of his term, I'm still waiting to see if some of these newer issues that have popped up are going to be resolved. But I think when you look at some of the big things that we were focused on as a city, whether it was finances, settling the contract with the firefighters, whether or not people are happy with it, I did have complaints and concerns about the way some of it was structured. The way it was framed to me was like, we can keep going down this fight every single day with them, and racking up interest and racking up debt, or we can finally resolve it. Again, I think it probably could have been resolved for a little less, but at least it's not something that's eating up the bulk of the conversation anymore. It's something that's been resolved and we're moving forward. I think one of the other big things, though, is how he's going to close the upcoming budget deficit. I think we're looking at something like $120 million right now and growing. And so while I feel like the first half of his administration has been really solid and he's done a good job in holding up and holding steady to what he ran on, I think the second half is going to really be a test because you've got a lot of issues that are coming up and then you've got re-election that's coming up. And so do you handle the issues in a way that you genuinely think they need to be handled regardless of public perception? Or do you handle the issues based on what different groups want to see done leading up to an election? And I think that's going to be the big question, at least for me.
I think those are all fair points. And I know the thing during, when he was running and all that was, we're going to audit all the departments. We're going to, which I can, from a conservative standpoint, from a fiscal standpoint, absolutely. That makes business sense. Government's a business at the end of the day. You want to run lean and efficient. And so, yes, I can totally on board with that approach and him cleaning up, inefficient processes and budgeting and all that. But has that improved? Because let's be honest, Houston crime rate, right? Like, has that improved? Has public safety improved under his?
So I think there's a big question about that right now because a number of the council members are saying that it hasn't. Some of the bigger things like homicide and things like that have gone down, which is like, okay, good, that's gone down. But like if you're talking about car break-ins and things like that haven't, and you have an increased number of people who aren't reporting them because they know that the police are going to take longer to respond, have they really gone down? So I think that's the question is we're talking about the big crimes, the ones where you can't like really get away from. Those seemingly have kind of tapered off or gone down, but the other ones maybe not. And then there's currently a big question surrounding the number of bodies that have been found in the bayous in recent weeks and kind of the handling of that, which I thought was I don't want to say, I think it kind of missed the mark. I think, initially there's kind of this barrage of bodies that was found, and then the mayor held a press conference saying there's no serial killer, but there's no additional information about where they came from. And then since then there have been a number that have been found since. So I don't know that that's been handled the way that I would have preferred, and that we still don't have any information. So I know that we're not getting the information I would prefer we're getting. So that's to be determined. I think he said something when he first came into office, which was that crime or the perception of public safety isn't just about the crime rate, it's about how people feel. And he got a lot of heat for that. I agreed with him because it is about how people feel, but I don't know that people necessarily feel significantly better today than they did before. And so I don't know if you're measuring it by that standard, if we are better, because I think people are still concerned.
All right, I can't let you gloss over the bayou stuff. Texas is known for this sort of thing. Texas Fields, right? It's on Netflix. Fields, yeah. Lady Bird Lake.
Yeah.
This thing, right? Let's talk a little conspiracy. What do you think? What does Charles Blain's magnificent mind think is going on?
I honestly do not know. I do think that there's something more here to see. Like, I think it's very weird to claim that these are all independent, no relation to each other incidents. I mean, I don't know if they are, why this is suddenly happening rather than any other year. My thing I was telling somebody once was that I'd understand if we found these like significant numbers immediately after a hurricane where like the water, like things happened, the water kind of got churned up and now bodies that might have been there for a couple months, years are starting to resurface. But there was like, we've had no rain, we're in a drought, like there's been nothing really going on. Suddenly you have people from UH students to some young adults to adults, some homeless, some not, like just a wide array of people who are being found. And then there was an individual whose body was found, and I don't know that they said he was homeless, but he was mentioned within the bulk of homeless people that was found. So he was kind of just like lumped in that broader conversation. And also in that conversation was a conversation about mental health. And his niece came out and said, well, one, we saw him a couple of days before that and he was not homeless. He had a home. And two, he was not struggling with mental health. And his niece was like a reporter, maybe out of Atlanta or something. And she was like, he was very fine. And now he's not. So there's something more to it. So I don't know what's going on, but I do think that there's something more here to look at. And I don't like when the city's like, nothing to see here, because that just gives me more concern.
Interesting. Yeah. So, with 2024 election, the national elections passed, 2025 ending, the current president administration, what laws do you see affect urban policy and more specifically Texas, Houston, urban policy?
Yeah, so I think some of the bigger ones, it's been the approach of the administration more than anything. So with they put out a executive order, I want to say in July, that looked at homelessness and how they were going to take the grants that major cities get through the Department of Justice and other departments and tie them to a city's response to homelessness. So if a city was like San Francisco, not necessarily clearing out encampments or providing safe injection sites and things like that, they would cut their grants for DOJ. Vice versa, if a city was aggressively in cleaning encampments and things like that, they would, expedite grants or at least allow them to be eligible for grants. And so I think changing that incentive is going to change how cities respond to it, because cities are so dependent on grant funding, federal grant funding for homelessness. So for better or worse, I think it's going to have a major impact on it. Now, I say for better or worse, because I don't know what that's going to portend. Like, I don't know if this is going to produce a huge positive or negative, because even cleaning these encampments has proven to be very expensive. And then you just kind of move people from one place to another place. So who knows? But I think that's going to have a massive impact, because we've been seeing upticks in homelessness in Houston. Austin has a significant homeless problem, San Antonio. So I think Texas will face some serious, I wouldn't say consequences, but one way or the other, either some positive effects or consequences outside of that. I think another one is what the federal government chooses to do with the Ike Dike. This has been something that's been pending here in the Houston area, at least for a very, very long time. And there's not been federal funding allocated to it. And if, God forbid, we get kind of the big one and the hurricane comes up the ship channel, you're looking at a ton of destruction for one of the busiest ports in the country, become obviously oil producer and refinery. Like, you're going to have a massive hit to our global economy, but certainly to the U.S. economy if we don't get that taken care of. So I think that's kind of the big thing is the federal government going to come in with their funding or not? And then more recently, they came down with, there's something else I can't remember. There's road funding. So there's a big issue going on in Houston right now when it comes to, in Montrose, there's these rainbow crosswalks that they have painted, and now TxDOT is tying road funding and future funding, mobility funding, to cities getting rid of these, what they're calling political statements, if you will. And so there's been a big fight here over the weekend over whether or not they were going to do it. The mayor has been kind of quiet on it to a certain extent. I mean, he did say he was going to try to do whatever it takes to not get caught up sideways with the federal and state government. But so we'll see. I don't know. I mean, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they actually did get rid of it over the weekend. But this is another instance of the federal government adjusting kind of the carrot and stick model and saying, in order for you to get the funding that we have for you, you need to do X, Y, and Z and implement these policies from our perspective. And so that's a new interesting model that we're seeing. If it's going to work, I think it's to be determined. These are kind of the first two really big issues, the homeless one and the road funding one, where they're doing it. But it's certainly getting cities to respond so far.
So you mentioned something interesting about the homeless issue. So, and again, just to prove that I was, because of the timing and everything, but when I was in Texas, I was a true viewer of, what's her point? North Texas politics doesn't translate to South Texas politics, right? Totally get it, right? Different, right? Geography, everything. So, because I used to live in Dallas, Fort Worth area, it was clean. Like downtown, like there's homeless compared to LA, clean. I lived in the Woodlands, but I would hang out in Houston. You see LA level, right? Why does Dallas and Fort Worth have less homeless, and why is it cleaner versus places like Houston, San Antonio, and Austin? Just what's your thought?
Well, I think it's what people are willing to tolerate. I think people just are not willing to tolerate it up in North Texas as much as they've been willing to tolerate it here. And by people, I mean citizens. Like, I think if you had that in Dallas, citizens would be a little more vocal when going to City Hall. I do think that we have a unique issue in the sense that with what used to be our downtown bus station, when inmates were released from TDCJ, they were released from Huntsville. Some of them, not all of them, but some of them were released from Huntsville, and the bus would take them straight to the downtown bus station and drop them off. And so then they would kind of spread out from there and be around there, because all you're getting is, I mean, you might have an ID and a couple dollars, but they don't really give you much else. So you had kind of like a drop-off spot. But again, even if that drop-off spot was in Dallas, downtown Dallas, I don't think the public would have accepted kind of living and tolerating that level of homelessness in one area for so long. And unfortunately, I think in Houston they have. I think that's changing to a certain extent. People are really frustrated with seeing it and with how it's kind of spreading it into their neighborhoods and some of the danger and things that have come from it. So I think we're changing, but it's been a long time coming, and I don't know that it's a fast change.
So, this is what you do, right? You read policy and you write policy proposals. So I know you have ideas. What would be if you were the governor of Texas, what would be your proposed, law to clean up and solve Texas homeless issue?
Good question. That's tough. I think I would start off with, it needs to start with TDCJ, because I think when TDCJ, the problem is when you release folks and you don't release them with kind of proper identification or any money, they have nowhere to go. And so a lot of times they can get it, but it takes a little while for them to process it and then to get out and get it. So I would say the first thing they need to do is, as they're releasing folks, before they release them, 24, 48 hours, they need to be processing it so they have an ID, whatever it is, state ID, something, so they can get some sort of help, like something somewhere. And so I think that would alleviate some of it. I don't know about all of it, but then others, I do like the approach of saying that if federal funding and grant funding is tied to cities addressing it, and I would do something similar from the state level. I wouldn't put a parameter on what they do, but if they are addressing it and it was proven to reduce it, I would kind of tie state funding to that. And the reason I say that is because I do think the cities, each individual one, is the best capable of devising a plan to fix it for their citizens, because I don't think the answer that's best in Dallas is going to be the same one that's in Houston, that's in San Antonio. They're all different populations with different needs. And so I would just tie it to the city's attempts and the results of those attempts to address the issue, because I really do think that city councils and mayors, incentivized appropriately, can find the best solutions to the problem.
Absolutely. And, you can take that approach, that incentivized plan approach from a government standpoint, and you bring it into private sector. That's why they have total rewards. Yep. That's why they have, equity comp plans for, C-suite. And that's why they have incentive plans for, whatever population, because as humans, we're reward driven, right? And so absolutely, I think that going to that human psyche of like financial reward will drive human change, right? Human actions. I think that's a great way of tackling that. Absolutely.
Yeah. That's the right way.
And so, right. And speaking of all these great ideas that you have, I'm assuming you're probably writing it in your new book that you're drafting, right? I know it's in the works. Can you share a little bit about what it's about?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, I'm really excited about it. It kind of diverges from some of my typical work. And so the central message of the book is that as a society, we've begun to prioritize everything above spending time in community with friends. And I don't just mean friends, but like very close friends who we can be our authentic selves with and who can hold us accountable. And when you look at this issue, even more on the kind of consolidated effort, you're looking at it as a problem with a lot of men are dealing with, particularly as we age, and with all the other preoccupations of life. It's viewed as wasting time if you're spending time with friends rather than investing it into something worthwhile, because you could be at church or with family or work or all these other things. But the reality is, kind of spending time building community is not a luxury. It's something that we all desperately need. And when you look at all of the effects of not being in community, there are a lot of negative health effects and societal effects and civic effects as well. And on the flip side, there are a ton of innumerable positive effects that come from actually investing and spending time in community. And so it's a broader societal issue that I hope that addressing will lead to, I don't want to say a full whole-scale healing of our politics, but I think if we find ourselves in community again, we can then begin to appreciate all ideas that we might disagree with, learn how to disagree more healthy, and then we can rebuild kind of that community aspect in our local politics, which can then feed its way up to national politics. So it's a long-term goal that we'll see if we'll ever reach, but at least this is kind of the start of it, is addressing this idea of friendship among men and maintaining brotherhood as we grow older.
I love that. And, the thing is, as men, right, there's, let's be honest, a lot of men are lone wolves, or tend to have one or two, me being one of those where, I'm very selective with who I interact with. And I'm sure, there are individuals too, where sometimes it might be hard for a male to open up to, other males, right? Why do you think that is?
Yeah. So when you look, I had the same question. And when I was reading through some of the data and stuff, it really goes to how we develop these friendships. And a lot of guys who have traditionally, you make friends as a kid because you're in the same place for 8 hours a day, every day, and you just can't help it. But then as we get older, you go off to college, or you go to work, or you move, you kind of break those bonds. And it's like, well, where do you find friends now? Like, it's kind of difficult to do. And then couple that with this kind of decrease in places that so naturally as we age, there are fewer places to make friends, but I think as a society, we have fewer places as well. Men used to spend time in sporting clubs and social clubs and different kind of things like that that would foster a friendship. We don't really have as many of those, or we're not spending as much time there. And then lastly, it's kind of just the biological way that men make friends versus the way women typically make friends. Talking very generally speaking, but like the biology of it or the psychology of it says that we typically make friends by doing things together, like if it's a sporting club or something like that, where we're doing an activity together that then creates the path for friendship. And so when you have fewer of all of those things, it makes it harder. And so what the book does is it analyzes, or not really analyzes, but talks to a bunch of different guys about their way of doing it and highlights how easy it can be. So one of the groups we talked to, or one of the guys I talked to, his name's Frank Schwartz, and he's a part of this workout club that meets every day at 5 a.m. And it's just a couple guys. They meet 5 a.m. every day, work out, they do a little fellowship because they're all religious, and then they kind of talk about any issue that might be going on in their lives. And so not only for them, it's Bible study, it's a workout, and it's hanging out all mixed into one, rather than 3 separate hours of doing these things that we can get it done at the start of the day. And so there's guys who have figured out different ways to implement it in their lives that way, where it's not such a burden. It's just kind of doing things that you would typically do, but also including others with it so that you can build friends and kind of rebuild that brotherhood.
Awesome. Love it. Charles, I know we're almost up to the hour, so I appreciate your time. There is one last question, if you don't mind me asking. What would you say to the next generation of Charles Blaine? What would you say, what advice would you give them to reach success, be themselves authentically, make a difference in life? What would be that one piece of advice you would give to the next generation?
I would say, especially given that there's so much focus on, TikTok stars and YouTube stars and stuff, is they don't focus on the acclaim, don't focus on getting awards, don't focus on people knowing your name, any of that. Find what you genuinely enjoy doing. I think we might have said this at the start of the conversation, what you can do for 8 to 10 hours a day and just genuinely enjoy doing. And then take that and then focus on that and be the best at that. Because with that, you will get all that other stuff. Even if that's what you're seeking, which you shouldn't be in general, but if that's what you're seeking, that will come from you focus on what you're doing, particularly in today's age where people seek out authenticity. They want to know that you enjoy whatever it is you're selling to them. So like, I'm not a salesman, but ultimately I'm trying to sell policy ideas to people. And so we're all selling something in a way, and people want to know that you believe it. They want to know that you buy into it, and they want to feel your passion behind it. And so that's something, there are people out there who can fake that, but it's very hard to fake for a long time. And so I would say find what drives you to that degree and then pour all into it. And you will wake up 5 years later and maybe not have everything you wanted, but you'll start to see that things are going in the right direction.
Wise words from a wise man. Charles Blaine, thank you for being on, sir.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.